everyone, I'm Natasha, this is my channel Nat Rosette, and today we're going to be talking about some sequels that I want to read in 2021. I have 15 sequels on my list that I want to get to in 2021. Some of these have already been published, some of them will be coming out next year, and some of them are more prequels than sequels, which we'll discuss in further detail. But in general, these are all series that I really love so far and I would definitely recommend. And even though we're going to be talking about sequels, I promise to keep everything spoiler free. So even if you haven't read the first books in any of these series, that won't be a problem. So first up on my list is Harrow the Ninth by Tamsin Muir, and this is the second book in the Locked Tomb trilogy. So the first book was called Gideon the Ninth, and I think became rather well known under the tagline Lesbian Necromancers in Space, which of course caught my attention and was a big reason of why I picked up the first book. It did not disappoint at all, and I'm so excited to get into Harrow. The first book had so many badass scenes, some awesome necromancy, and a fun enmity between the two main characters, Harrow and Gideon, who are paired up to represent the ninth house in this sort of competition to become basically an immortal necromancy badass version. I will say these books are pretty dark, and the author has a very unique style of writing that is actually kind of dense, like really fun, lots of fun references and things, but this is actually a much slower read for me than most fantasy books are, both because the writing tended that way and because there are just so many different characters to keep track of from, like, you know, 9 different houses, and they all tend to have names that were hard for me to remember. But like, despite all that, it's 100% worth it, and this is actually probably also going to be on my list of books that I want to reread next year because I just want to spend more time with this series. I can't decide yet if I want to reread Gideon before or after I read Harrow. I think either way I'll probably notice a lot of things that I missed the first time around. So yeah, if you haven't read this series yet and were on the fence about it or something, I definitely recommend it. The second book on my list is The Ippos King by Grace Draven, which is the third book in the Wraith Kings series. This is one of the few books on this list where I've actually already read multiple books in the series, and this one is also a fantasy romance series. So Radiance by Grace Draven is sort of the go-to recommendation for anyone looking for fantasy romance. It's got this awesome fantasy world with conflict between the Kai, who are like these non-human characters, sort of orc-like in some ways, but not, and then humans, and so there's this arranged marriage between a Kai and a human, and that relationship is the focus of the first 2 novels. Absolutely lovely, especially the first book, just the way that they came to trust and depend on each other, and then that gradually grew into a more romantic relationship. I would say the first book for me felt more like fantasy romance, and then the second book felt more like romantic fantasy where there was romance, but there was more focus on the fantasy plot. And then this book I'm really excited for because we already know who the main characters are going to be. The heroine in particular has already become one of my favorite characters in the first 2 books, so I'm really excited for her to get her own focus and her own romance in this one. The guy is also someone we've met who is a human, and he is very unabashed in his interest in her, has been in the first couple of books, and just in general in the way that he enjoys life. So they're characters that clash quite a lot. Like, she's already aware of his interest in her, but she, you know, has this hardened exterior and just hasn't been interested at all so far, but they go on this journey, and yeah, I'm sure it's gonna be great. The next book is a sequel to one of my favorite reads of the year, which was Kushiel's Dart, and this one is Kushiel's Chosen. This series is called Phaedre's Trilogy, and it's by Jacqueline Carey, and this book, it was like a 900-page, I have it here, it was like a 900-page mass market that I ended up tabbing so thoroughly. This is one of the first times I annotated a book. I didn't write in it, but I did add lots of tabs, and the colors have meanings more or less. And I spent so much time in this book. It took me like over 2 months to get through it mostly because I was reading slowly and not like a lot at a time. This one is another one that I think a lot of people would consider romantic fantasy, and it has a number of relationships. The main character is actually a sex worker, so like she has plenty of sort of casual sex with patrons, and then multiple other more serious romantic relationships. But there's this one relationship in particular that just like absolutely ruined me. When I wrote my discussion/review about it, I summarized their relationship as I can't live with you, but I can't live without you. And it's just like, it was such a slow burn, and then even at the end it's kind of unresolved in certain ways, and I know that it's going to hurt me in the next book, but I'm ready for that. But yes, aside from the romance, it's also just an excellent fantasy. I really enjoyed this world, and the fact that there are so many just like smart, capable women in positions of power and positions of not power. Like, we get to meet the princess, and she's great, but then also, like I said, Fidri is a sex worker, and like she has certain power there, but not all that much. And it's just like there's a bunch of women spread throughout this plot that I really enjoyed the characterization of, even some of whom were, you know, villains and very aggravating. I was trying to say aggrandizing, that's not a word. And, you know, very aggravating in what they were doing, but they were still such great characters. So if you are looking for something that is like an epic fantasy with a good deal of romance, lots of political machinations, and aren't put off by sex scenes, or there are also a number of content warnings for this, definitely like rape, torture, various other ones, like look that up if you need to. Yeah, this is not a series for everyone, but I really loved the first book and am eager to get to the next one. Next up, surprisingly, one that I actually have in physical format already, is Storm of Locusts by Rebecca Roanhorse. So this is a sequel to Trail of Lightning. You probably, if you're in the fantasy community, heard some hype about Rebecca Roanhorse's newest book, Black Sun, which starts off a new trilogy, I think it is. And I haven't read all of that one. I've read about a third of it, and like I'm really enjoying it, but the tone of that versus the tone of this series is very different. I would say Rebecca Roanhorse is great for stories with unique world building that pulls from certain mythology. So in both cases there's that, and very intense scenes. Poignant? Is that how you say that word? Very poignant scenes. But these ones, as you can see, are much shorter and are much faster paced. So if you're down for unique world building but don't want to spend a lot of time like ramping things up, I'd say like these are such a fun, fast-paced read. I tore through this one and I loved it, and obviously I'm excited to get to the next one. Next we have a graphic novel series of which I've read the first 2 volumes, Monstress by Marjorie Liu, and the art is by Sana Takeda. So these have, as you can probably tell from the covers, absolutely gorgeous art. The main drawback of this series is actually its world building. It has, I feel like, enough world building for like a regular fantasy story in the form of, you know, a novel or whatever, but it's in a graphic novel. And so the first time or two you read the first volume, like at least for me, it was just confusing. Some of the lore and like what was going on between different factions and stuff. So that's part of the reason why I can't say that everyone will love these, and another reason is that it is very dark. There's brutality towards children, nudity, lots of that sort of stuff. But if that doesn't bother you, then I would definitely recommend giving it a shot. So yeah, I enjoyed both of these. I think both of them had specific drawbacks to them, but I'm excited to see if, as the story progresses and I get more comfortable with the lore of this world, if it'll become a little bit easier to read and I'll enjoy the next few volumes. I think there's up to 5 now, a little bit more. Then we have Tristan's Folly by Marcus Lee. This is book number 2 in the Gifted and the Cursed series, which is a self-published dark epic fantasy, I guess. The first book is called Kings and Daemons, and basically the premise is that there's this demon king who's sucking like the life from his kingdom in order to retain his mortality, so that looks like like greenery gone from all the plant life, people more often getting sick, etc. And people have various powers in this world, and whenever you have a power, you know, he confiscates that child and takes them to be part of his like royal military. Our main character Mara grew up hiding her power, which is like a healing power, and so she basically has the opposite effect of what he does. You know, she heals things, she can return greenery to plant life, etc. And they're obviously in conflict as her secret is no longer hidden because of various events. So as you can probably tell already, this has a very obvious like dark versus light theme. I would say like lots of fantasy has the dark versus light, but this is like not even metaphor, it's like right there on the page for you. And although it's a pretty dark fantasy, it does have a pretty hopeful tone just because of like the character that Mara is and the way that she and her friends interact with the world. And despite this dichotomy, there are some great characters who I really enjoy. There's this one that's basically sort of like a vampire-ish character, and this other one who starts out as a member of the military, but then has somewhat of a change of heart. Speaking of which, the characterization, I feel like I'm talking too much. Like, I feel like this is too much detail for a video of this size. Like, this is supposed to be an overview of why I'm reading the sequels, and I'm basically doing a full review of each of these books. Anyways, the characterization and growth of most of the main characters in this book I really enjoyed. I did actually feel like Mara, the main character, was the one I couldn't connect with as much, so I'm hoping I enjoy more of her characterization in the next book. I've heard that it's pretty much a story of a military siege for the most part, which sounds like a good time to me, so I'm excited for that one. Ugh, my camera overheats and dies, and I thought it had recovered and I turned it back on, but then it wasn't recording, so I've basically recorded the rest of this video and now I have to re-record it all. So sorry, but sorry to me more than to you, but we are halfway through. Next is Thrawn Treason, which is the third book in the Thrawn trilogy, which is the second Thrawn trilogy. The original Thrawn trilogy starts with Heir to the Empire, and that's the series that, like, if you haven't read any Star Wars novels, you start there. I can talk more about that in another video, but trust me. And then there's also a third Thrawn series that's currently being published, that's, I think, Thrawn Ascendancy. These books are all by the same author, Timothy Zahn, who is my favorite Star Wars author. And I read the first book in this second trilogy a while ago, probably like back in March? No. Was it last year? Yeah, that was like the summer of last year. That's so long ago. Anyways, I read it through audiobook when I wasn't doing a lot of reading at the time, and I really enjoyed it. The premise is, this is basically during the time when the Empire is thriving, and the main character is Thrawn, who is a Chiss from the outer region, but he's been kicked out basically from the Chiss Ascendancy, and he comes to be in the military of the Empire, and he's like this great tactical genius rising up through the ranks. He has this sidekick, Eli Vanto, who's more of a, you know, normal person, but he's trying to train him to also be a tactician. And yeah, I really enjoyed the first book. The second book I read more recently, and I couldn't get into it quite as much. It had quite a bit of Darth Vader in it, and I think I didn't really enjoy his characterization. But I'm hopeful for this third one that it'll be a bit better. It has better reviews on Goodreads than the second one, and I hope that it goes out on a strong note so that I can be really excited to move on to the next Thrawn trilogy. They really need to give these like better separate names. There's no need for them all to be named after the like one main character. And then we have Girls of Storm and Shadow, which is a sequel to Girls of Paper and Fire by Natasha Nagan. I'm not sure if that's how you say her last name. I've actually never heard it pronounced. But I picked this one up early on in the year when I was getting back into fantasy because it had a beautiful cover and I'd heard good reviews about it, but also because the author's name is Natasha, and whenever an author or a character has the same name as I do, I like feel compelled to read the book, even though that, I mean, it doesn't make sense. But the first one was probably a solid 4 stars for me, even though I think I probably gave it more at the time. It's a YA fantasy, although it deals with some pretty heavy topics, including like sexual assault. These 7 girls are basically chosen to be the king's consorts for a year. I think it's a year. And there's this like underground rebellion that some of them get involved in, etc. So I'm ready for continuation of the sapphic relationship that we got in the first novel. And also, weirdly, I'm predicting that there will be main character deaths in the next book, which that's not a spoiler because I haven't read it. I don't know if that's true or not, but I'm predicting it, and I'm hoping sort of that there will be, because I don't know, I'm just weird. I've been realizing recently that I actually enjoy when authors do kill off main characters, so long as it's done like for a reason and, you know, giving the character respect. But I guess it just like, it ups the stakes a lot, because even like a lot of dark fantasies, plenty of people die, but if it's not a character you're attached to, then it doesn't like feel like there's actual stakes involved. Or I don't know, maybe I just enjoy the pain. But yeah, I'm ready for that. As I mentioned, there's a couple of books on this list that are more prequels than they are sequels. The first one of these is Balam Spring by Travis Riddle. I talked about Flesh Eater by Travis Riddle in my November wrap-up. I really enjoyed it. I had read another book of his, Spit and Song, which was the second book in the Ustlian Tales series, but the books in the series are standalone, so now I want to go back and read the first book in the series, Balam Spring. I really enjoy the tone that he takes with writing, the way that he does his fantasies. They're just like adventure-y and comforting, and his worlds are unique and fun. So I'm excited to spend more time in this world and maybe see what one of his slightly older books is like. It's only from 2018, so it's not that much older. And then the other one that's in this category is They Only Come Out at Night, which is part of the Yarns world by Benedict Patrick. Also in my November wrap-up, I talked about To Dream and Die as a Taniwa Girl, which is book 5 in the Yarns world, but a standalone. And I haven't read the rest of the series, but enjoyed that one enough that I want to. I know that one of the books in the series gives the origin story of the main characters in that book, which I'm very excited to find out. And then also, again, I just am eager to spend more time in this world. I'm a little bit nervous because the book I read made use of this one plot twist that I really enjoyed, but is something that you can only really use once. And so I'm nervous that maybe the other ones just won't have the same level of surprise to them that I really enjoyed. But still, I have high hopes, and I'm excited to get to them. If you can tell, my voice is starting to go out because I don't usually talk this much, and I've filmed like half this video twice, so maybe I'll try to be a little bit more concise and finish this out. Finally, we have a few books that haven't come out yet, but have release dates in 2021. The first one of these is The Witness for the Dead by Catherine Addison. This is the sequel to The Goblin Emperor, and it's more of a companion novel than a sequel. It features a different main character, but one who was a side character in the first novel, and he's able to communicate with the dead. I'm not sure how different to expect, like the tone and everything of this one to be. The first one, you know, the main character was a king, and we got a lot of political machinations that I really enjoyed. And I don't know how much of that will be in the second one, but still, The Goblin Emperor is a potential comfort read for me. I haven't reread it yet, but I can see it becoming that, and so I'm really excited for this next one. And I'm very happy that I did not read The Goblin Emperor when it originally came out 7 years ago, because I did not have to wait 7 years for the sequel, like, you know, all of those plebs. And I get to read it like a year later, which is, you know, a much more reasonable time frame for me as a reader. Oh, and The Witness for the Dead is scheduled to be published on June 22nd. So on May 21st, How to Find a Princess by Alyssa Cole is scheduled to release, and this is the sequel to How to Catch a Queen, which is the first book I read by her. I love the characters, I love the romance, and I especially loved the world building. And the whole time I was reading it, I was thinking of it as a fantasy romance. But then I realized upon finishing it, there's actually like no fantasy, like there's no magic or anything. It does feature fictional countries and everything, but I guess rather than fantasy, it's more of a, I don't know, contemporary, alternate history, something like that. So this one is going to be sapphic, and I think the princess is the main character, and she runs away and then ends up falling in love with the woman who's the investigator, who they send to track her down, which sounds so good. And like, these covers are absolutely gorgeous. I don't usually, like, usually real people on covers is kind of meh, but these are stunning. And also, it's supposed to be an Anastasia retelling, but I don't really know what that means because I'm uncultured and never watched Disney as a child aside from like Robin Hood. So if that is interesting to you, it's there, but yeah. Finally, we're in the last 3. First up, the sequel to Seven Devils by Laura Lamb and Elizabeth May. This is a young adult sci-fi told from a variety of perspectives. Basically, there's a big evil empire, and the characters we're following are members of the rebellion, trying to keep this empire from, like, basically exterminating an entire species. There's a variety of queer rep in this one. I know there's a number of sapphic characters, a trans character, maybe some others, I don't remember exactly. But I follow both of these authors on Twitter, and their most recent update I saw was that they have finished up their first draft of the sequel. So, you know, it's coming. The expected publication is in May, and I'm trying not to hype myself up for this one too much because I was like really hyped for the first book, and it actually brought my enjoyment of it down a little bit because it was great, but like I was still a little bit disappointed. So I'm trying to be a little more chill about this sequel, but I'm still excited and I think I'll enjoy it. Then we have The Bone Shard Emperor, which is the second book in the Drowning Empire series by Andrea Stewart. The first one was The Bone Shard Daughter, which I very much loved, and I picked it up in part because I had just read Gideon the Ninth, and this one also features necromancy of a sort. It's more like building semi-sentient creatures from like pieces of bone, but close enough. The series is called The Drowning Empire because this world is basically a bunch of islands, and they start mysteriously drowning, which is obviously not good for the people living there, and we don't know why. I don't know why even after the first book, so I'm guessing that might not even be revealed until the third book. It includes some mystery, this adorable, like, sentient animal named Methy, who is sort of like an otter crossed with, I don't know, a bunch of other animals. They said like a fox. I basically think of it as an otter. But so adorable and sort of like the sidekick to the sailor, and the most main character in the first one was the princess, and I'm excited to see where things continue to go for her. The first one had an established sapphic relationship, and although I enjoyed some of what was explored through their point of views, for the most part I wished there had been a little bit more done there, so I'm hoping that I get to enjoy their perspectives a little bit more in this one. And I'm also hoping, because this seems to be the type of series where new perspectives are picked up at various times when it makes sense, so I'm hoping we get some cool new points of view in the next one as well. Oh, and that one's scheduled to come out in September. Finally, we have the Quicksilver Court, which is the sequel to the Obsidian Tower. This one's scheduled to come out in November. The Obsidian Tower is a young adult fantasy. The main character has this curse where she can't touch anyone without killing them, and the castle that she lives in is like this old place with lots of secret tunnels, and there's this mysterious like giant obsidian tower in there that is sealed with runes and that they are there to protect. This one also features queer rep. The main character is bisexual, and there's actually like some opposite queer baiting, like straight baiting, that takes place, which I approve of. There's this troupe of people that reminds me of like a theater troupe that like travels around taking care of magical stuff gone wrong, and I really enjoy that. Okay, I've got to talk very quickly because my SD card is running out of room. But I know that this has been a long video, so if you're still here, thank you so much for watching. Please leave a like and consider subscribing. A comment below would be lovely, much appreciated, and I hope to see you in the next video.